that one right. I thought that. Did you know that's the one that I always thought was wrong? Gannett one versus Pedersen. Oh. Nice to see you. How are you? So you can come up here and go. Yeah, I'll move that over. Go ahead. I'll shoot it. You're doing it. Look at you. Oh, clearance. I love the clearance.
Perfect. Keep going. That's all right. You got it.
Do you know where Aiden went to, Sharon? Sharon, do you know where Aiden went to?
Where Aiden went to. Sarah would know that, and I wouldn't.
Okay.
And Sarah is on her way.
Okay.
Colin has a question.
Thank you. Hey, quick question about the Focusrite. I'm not getting sound. I've got this thing running. Got my chest on here. I'm listening to it. So it's going in here, coming out there, and I'm not getting sound. So I want to double check my. Right, we are getting.
Alright, so those things are plugged in.
Aiden, couple more water. They can be room temp.
So we're getting that.
Here.
more than a
Here is
college.
live.
If that's all I have, then I'm in pretty good shape.
Glad you saw it. Thank you very much.
There's one thing, I also got John, and John got
Test. Huh. You getting audio now?
No.
They don't work more often than they used to.
What's that?
Hello, everyone. God forbid that I should know that this was here, but I didn't. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to 225 Dyer, Wexford Science and Technology. This is the home of Cambridge Innovation Center, and this is smack in the middle of our hood, better known as the Jewelry District. So, JDA, go JDA, thank you very much. Okay, we have decided to have this very important forum this evening. And the JDA has been providing advocacy and leadership, believe it or not, since 1994. And I've been around for almost that amount of time, so that's why I'm older than dirt. But no reaction, please. Okay, so I'd like to recognize we have 3 council people here. That would be Councilwoman Helen Anthony. Could you stand? Councilwoman Nerva Lafortune at the front table. And Councilman John Goncalves, where are you? There you are. I'd also like to recognize our sister associations, College Hill, Fox Point, Mile of History, and Downtown. In addition to that, I'd like to thank the leaders of Washington Park, West Broadway, and Elmwood. We continue to fight the good fight as we advocate for quality of life in all of our neighborhoods. Today is also a good day for preservation with the announcement for plans to save the Superman building. Applause, please. This has been a heavy lift, and many people have worked long and hard to bring us to this place. We thank all of those who never gave up on that both long and winding road. And to bring us back to the people who I must thank, that would be my board of directors. They rarely get mentioned, but we couldn't do our work without them. They're mostly sitting in the front row, and it goes like this. Olin Thompson, Lou Dana, Al Dahlberg, Ken Ornstein, Anthony Santuri, Andrew Meyer, Peter McClure, Phoebe Blake, Marjorie Winter, Jack Templin, Jennifer Lorelli, Shannon Marshall, and Arthur Salisbury. These are the people who help make this place the best that it can be for all of us to live, work, and play. Please take a look at the flyer that we left on your seats. You can both find contacts for the candidates, pretty important. And if you flip it over, you will have a better understanding of some of the things that we do for our neighborhood. And now for the man for the moment who made the best decision ever. And that was to locate his office and that of the Boston Globe right here in the Jewelry District. Yes, Dan McGowan is a columnist covering Rhode Island for the Boston Globe. He joined the staff in 2019 after spending 6 years with WPRI TV, where he covered Providence City Hall and schools. He is the author of Roadmap, a free daily newsletter on the Ocean State. He lives in Providence and is a board member for Access RI, a nonprofit that advocates for improving citizen access to government records. In his spare time, of which there is not much, he coaches youth baseball at Mount Pleasant Little League. And with that, I give you Dan McGowan.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. As Sharon said, this building, if it's your first time here, is a beautiful space, and the Boston Globe is thrilled to have its office space here. We're thrilled to welcome all of you to this space. We want to use this even more for public conversations like the one we're going to have tonight. Sharon mentioned many of the dignitaries in the room and board members. I feel like your board could fill out the Red Sox roster. The most important thing, is there are a lot of voters in this room, and it's so nice to see you guys engaged. There's going to be lots and lots of people watching this on Facebook live as well on the Jewelry District Association's website, so our Facebook page. So again, thank you so much for being here. What I want to say is there's no strict format to tonight's forum. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to have 60-second openings and 60-second closing statements. The rest is going to be a free-flowing conversation with me. I would ask you guys to silence your cell phones if you can, but don't be afraid to tweet and mix it up a little bit. I know a lot of you submitted questions to the Jewelry District Association. We're taking this all into account, I promise. We're going to get through this in I'm going to try to get it done in 90 minutes. We'll see how it goes. But let's start with Michael Solomon. Michael, your 60-second opening, your introduction, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Solomon.
Hold on one second. It's not on. Now it is.
Is that better?
Let's make sure all of
Excellent. My name is Michael Solomon. I'm a former city council president, and I'm a candidate for mayor. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Sharon Stone and the Jewelry District Association for putting on this forum, and Dan, for you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. I love this city. I was born here, I was raised here, grew up here, raised my family here, and started my business here. Providence is my home. I am also proud to have served as a city council president to move our city forward. I believe in the city of Providence, and I believe in the people of the city of Providence. Right now, Providence is at a crossroads. There are no shortage of challenges facing our city and, frankly, our world right now. The next mayor needs to do three important things. First is to unite our neighborhoods, improve our public safety, and invest in our public schools. From day one, I will establish stronger ties between City Hall and our neighborhoods by empowering our citizens to work together with city government to move our city forward. No one has to convince me our city's future is bright. Providence needs a mayor who understands the challenges and will bring various stakeholders and coalitions together to move our city forward. And I look forward to being that mayor for all of Providence. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Brett Smiley, you have 60 seconds.
Great. Thank you, Sharon and Dan, members of the Jewelry District Association, and really everyone who took the time to be here tonight. My name's Brett Smiley, and I'm running for mayor because I love Providence. And like more and more people, I chose Providence. I lived and worked elsewhere and know that what we have here is special. Some of the best arts and culture and restaurants in the country, top universities, vibrant neighborhood businesses. We have all of the assets to be a world-class city. We also have the potential to be one of the best-run cities in the country by focusing on what matters: simple quality of life issues. And that's the focus of my campaign, are these core quality of life issues. And that includes having the best-run schools in the state. It includes restoring a sense of safety to our neighborhoods and getting a handle on the violence that we're experiencing. And it includes having a real and sustained economic development plan for our city. I was proud to serve as Providence's first chief operating officer, the chief of staff to the governor, and the state's director of administration. I'm confident that I can help build a team as diverse as this city to put the city on track to be the best-run city in the country and a true world-class city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Councilwoman Nerva LaFortune.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nerva LaFortune. I'm a Providence City Councilwoman, and I'm running to be the next mayor. And I was just thinking how this is not made for anyone who wears a dress. I'm running because I'm a parent. I grew up in the city of Providence. I'm raising my children here. We need a mayor that not only has the professional experience, but understands the lived experience of everyday people. We need a mayor who's going to prioritize the key issues: education, ensuring that we live in safe neighborhoods, ensuring that we have a strong economic infrastructure, and also a mayor who's going to make government works for all people. That means making sure our sidewalks are fixed, our roads are cleaned after the snow. I know that I am the best candidate for this job, and the time is now for us to move away from the status quo and elect someone who's going to get the work done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gonzalo Cuervo.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the organizers. My name is Gonzalo Cuervo, and I'm running for mayor of Providence. I live in Mount Pleasant. I raised my kids in Washington Park. I was a small business owner on Broad Street, and as a young man, I was a community organizer on the South Side. Everybody who's running for mayor loves the city of Providence. Everybody who's here loves the city of Providence. You wouldn't be here otherwise. We know the potential this city has. We know the remarkable human talent, the institutions, the culture that we have. But we realize that there's been something missing. There's something missing when we have all these fantastic ingredients and they can't seem to come together. We've seen that in conversations around our education. We've seen that in conversations around economic development. We're seeing that today in the conversation around the Superman building, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But here's the bottom line. I've spent my entire adult life as an organizer on the South Side, as a small business owner, as an arts booster, nonprofit leader. I spent more than a decade in City Hall under 2 administrations in senior leadership roles. And then I went to the State House where I spent the last 6 years of my life working those halls to help the Secretary of State pass important legislation around voting rights, lobbying transparency, and making it easier for businesses to navigate the very complex systems in our state. I want to bring these lived experiences as a parent, as a small business owner, as a person who's worked in government at different levels to the mayor's office, because I believe that my experience of bringing people together over all these years is exactly what the city needs right now to harness that talent. No one person is going to solve the problems that the city has. All of you and everybody that's out there together will solve those problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cuervo. What I will ask the audience is, at the end, we'll also give you a chance to applaud everybody. Let's try to get through the issues and everything rather than just applauding every time. But thank you for your enthusiasm. There are so many issues to get into tonight, but one of the first things that I want to, for all of you candidates to do is show us a little self-reflection. Mr. Smiley and all of you have deep experience in city government. So Mr. Smiley, starting with you, can you tell us one accomplishment in city government that you're most proud of? And then what was your biggest mistake when you worked for the city?
Sure. So when I had the opportunity to serve in the first year and a half of the Elorza administration, we had heard repeatedly, particularly from leaders in the Providence Foundation, that Providence had never had a long-term financial plan. And so we secured grant funding and engaged in a really robust process to actually publish a 10-year financial plan for the city. And you know, some of the things in there were aspirational, some of them were kind of in the framework of brainstorming, but we charted a course for the 10-year financial plan for the city, much of which is still being implemented today. And that kind of long-range planning is exactly what Providence needs, and it was a work product that I was particularly proud of. In terms of reflections, you know, so much of what we experience as residents in the city and frustrations that we experience are as a result of people and really wrapped up in the union contracts that we live with in the city. We have a highly unionized workforce, and so many of the rules of the road are set in those contracts. In the early days of the Elorza administration, we had inherited a negotiating process with the Providence Teachers Union. They were working without a contract. Mayor Taveras had been negotiating a contract, and they couldn't reach agreement before his term was up. And so we inherited a negotiation process that was kind of 3/4 through. And we received a lot of pressure to kind of wrap it up. Trust us, we've done a lot of good work. This is as good as you're going to get. just wrap it up. This is as good as you're going to get. And that ended up being a missed opportunity, honestly. I don't think I can't speak for the mayor, but I know if I had to do it all over again, I would have pushed to either start over or push for more changes, because so many of the challenges in our schools are tied up in that contract, and the changes that we got in that contract were simply not enough to improve student outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Ms. LaFortune, you're the lone council member of the group up here right now, currently. Biggest accomplishment and the thing you kind of regret?
So I'll speak to something a bit more recent. As we all know, we're still living through the midst of a pandemic. I passed legislation to create a committee to provide recommendations on how we can allocate ARPA funds. We have engaged, we all engaged in the most robust process in the state of Rhode Island. In fact, the survey results, we had more participants than the state survey that was put out. And what we did was outline recommendations of what people want in the city. They want to see investments in housing. They want to see investments in education. They want to see investments in infrastructure. But what was important for me, and something that I spoke up about and committed to, was making sure that whatever decisions we make as a city, we engage with the community. The community has to be a part of the decision-making process. Because for too long, we've lived in a city where there's been a bunch of backdoor deals, and it has to stop. We need to make sure that we're making smart, thoughtful decisions, and these decisions directly impact people. In terms of what I would have done differently, I'm a product of the Providence Public Schools. My daughter is a 6th grader at Nathan Bishop. My son graduated from Classical High School. He's a 2nd year studying business analytics at Rutgers University. What I wish I did differently was push the state a bit more around community engagement with our public schools. We can talk all day about trying to build our economic infrastructure. We can talk all day about trying to get more businesses in the city, to grow our housing stock. But if we don't have a strong educational foundation, the city will not move forward. I have a graduate degree in urban education policy because I don't want to be from Brown University, because I don't want to be one of those people who just talk about education. What I've been doing throughout my time on city council is working towards reforming our schools. And so I wish I did more, but as mayor, that is my #1 commitment, to have a pathway to get our schools back, but truly transform our schools, because I am personally vested. My children are in the schools.
Thank you, Ms. LaFortune. We'll talk plenty education, don't worry, I promise. Mr. Cuervo, biggest mistake and of course, your biggest accomplishment in your time in city service?
So I spent a lot of time, a significant amount of time in city service, and one of the things that I'm most proud of was being part of the team at the beginning, the first year of the Tavares administration, when the city was facing some serious fiscal challenges, primarily driven by economic recession, significant cuts that the state had made in aid to cities. And a lot of really difficult decisions were being made in addition to renegotiating contracts, legal action. And I was particularly proud to have played a role in that. We tried, and I particularly tried, to always remind the stakeholders in the room that we were dealing with people's lives, because it's often easy to look at these spreadsheets and to just make decisions based on numbers and not realizing that municipal government has the most direct impact on people's lives, more so than the state and more so than the federal government at times. And these were people's lives we were dealing with, everything from cuts to the libraries, trying to retain funding for libraries, all the way up to the possibility of reducing the workforce. I was particularly proud of the work that I did in that. And in terms of reflection, I think there are a lot of great things that were beginning to happen that were left undone towards the end of that administration.
You mean the Tavares administration?
The Tavares administration, yes. That they were left sort of incomplete, and I think that I would have liked to have had the opportunity to see those through.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, former council president. Biggest accomplishment?
Talk about stealing my thunder. It's Gonzalo on the other end. At that time, I happened to be the council president, so I understand what Gonzalo's talking about. And to me, that was probably my biggest accomplishment during the same era, because the day Angel Tavares became mayor, I became the council president. So we had to work together. We had a $110 million structural deficit, which was unheard of. So we had to bring all the stakeholders to the table. We had to renegotiate with our unions. We had to renegotiate with our colleges and universities to get everyone to pay their fair share and make a sacrifice. And I look back now, and I remember Councilman Sam Zuri at the time said that we could look back and say that would probably be our finest moment when we were able to make those adjustments and turn the city around. So I was always proud of that because I don't think people realized how close we were to a bankruptcy, because it was just, that deficit, like I said, it was $110 million, which was a lot of money. But because everybody sacrificed, everybody chipped in, and everyone worked together, we were able to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. And I always look back and say that was a proud moment for me.
And then your biggest regret as a council president?
I don't have any.
None at all.
No. I think at times I would always say I was too trustworthy on a lot of things. And I look back and I say, trust but verify. But and for the most part.
All right, let's talk about economic development. The big news today, of course, is the announcement that there is at least a deal in principle on the Superman building. $220 million project, potential mixed-use property with 285 apartments, some commercial property down there. On the city side, the commitment would be $10 million in a long-term loan, $5 million in something that would be approved by the council, and then a long-term tax stabilization agreement. So, Ms. LaFortune, you're the one person up here that will have to vote on this, potentially. Do you support this deal for the Superman building?
So I've been talking about the Superman building for quite some time. It's an opportunity for mixed-use development to address one of our significant housing needs in the city of Providence. It also will be an opportunity to bring in good-paying jobs to the city. We definitely need TSA reform, but one of the things we have to remember is that we have one of the highest commercial tax rates in the state of Rhode Island, in the country. So the TSA can be used as a tool to attract new businesses. This is an opportunity for us to create housing, and also it's going to provide 20% of the units to affordable housing. Also 20% will go to MBE as well as WE companies who are interested in participating in this project, And so I do think this is a good thing for the city of Providence because it has sat dormant for 9 years now, but we also need to make sure that during the process, when it comes to city council, we hold the developer accountable because if they're being incentivized to develop this much needed property in the city of Providence, we need to make sure that they in return are investing in the city.
Mr. Cuervo, you've already been somewhat critical of this proposed deal, so tell us about your concerns with the project.
I would say I'm skeptical until I have more information, because here's the reality. What we know so far is that there's a 40-year, $10 million loan going to a private developer. There's a $5 million grant, that's free money, $5 million. And on top of that, there's a TSA, the terms of which haven't been described, but we know that it will require enabling legislation, which leads one to believe that it's going to go beyond the traditional 12 or 15-year period, and it will probably end up being like a 30-year TSA. This is an incredibly generous package. And we all want to see the Superman building developed. It's an iconic building, but it's a building. And what my concern is, we as a city, as a state, we've kind of been fumbling around with economic development, and the Superman building has become an icon of that inability to move forward. And all of a sudden, we want to jump on an opportunity to develop it. And I think we need to be very careful. I think the council has to have some very good due diligence to make sure that we have some controls on this, to make sure that we're not, putting taxpayers at risk, or at least presenting an opportunity so that we can participate in this. We want to call it a public-private partnership, but the role of the public is to give the private a ton of money. What are we getting? That's what I would like to know. What do we get in return? Do we get an ownership stake? Do we get a guarantee that if this building is flipped in a couple of years, we're made whole? What do we get in exchange for putting up $15 million plus potentially tens of million dollars in a TSA?
Mr. Solomon, you were a former council president. You've worked on deals like this. I'm sure you were part of conversations about the Superman building. So what do you think? And respond to Mr. Cuervo's kind of thoughts about the concerns here.
Well, first of all, I haven't seen the numbers. I'd want to look at the numbers. And if we're negotiating, first, let me take a step back. There was a time where we were doing tax stabilizations. That was one of the tools in our toolbox. As council president, I did a study and I tried to put an ordinance in that would make that uniform for all businesses and take the politics out of TSAs in the city of Providence, where they would be uniform and there'd be a checklist where you'd have to check off all the different items to be eligible for a TSA. Apparently that never passed through the council, but that was one of the things that I was pushing for at one time. But a deal of this magnitude is going to take council approval. It's going to take probably legislative approval. And so we have to look at the numbers and we have to look at the risk factor. Since 38 Studios, everybody's had a very skeptical look on how we invest state money and how we invest city money. Nobody wants to be left holding the bag here, including the city of Providence. So right now I'm going to reserve judgment on how I would handle this until I looked at more numbers and see if it's feasible and the pros for the city and the cons for the city. And the means justify the moving forward. That's what I'm going to look at.
Mr. Smiley, before I get to you, I just want folks watching, and for those who don't know in the room, when we talk about TSAs, that's tax stabilization agreement. It's essentially a tax deal that involves a developer being able to pay less in taxes up front in order to develop their project, and then with the hope that eventually they will one day pay a full tax, full property tax. So, Mr. Smiley, with that said, how do you feel about this proposed Superman building project?
I'm excited about it. I am unequivocally excited to see the Superman building lit up again and providing life to downtown, providing people to eat lunch and have their kids play in the playground across the street in Kennedy Plaza and Burnside Park. I think this is great. This is not an all of the sudden thing. This building's been vacant for 9 years. I think today is the 9-year anniversary, in fact. I was proud to have served as Governor Raimondo's chief of staff, where we worked very hard on many proposals for this building, large commercial tenants, major corporate relocation efforts. All of them failed at the 5-yard line or the 10-yard line, or maybe not quite as close. This is the viable path forward. And Dan, I'm glad you explained what a TSA is, but it's important to note that we're talking about a discount on the percentage of the taxes that they would pay if it were fully occupied. This isn't a reduction in what we're currently getting. And honestly, I would like to see the building developed. I'd like to see it productive. I'd like to see those lights go on. And I'd rather get 10% of something than 100% of nothing in year one, and see this building occupied and actually provide new housing, 20% of which is going to be affordable housing for our city that desperately needs it.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Let's move from a big, tall building to a building that doesn't exist. The Thane Tower, of course, is what I'm talking about. We are standing literally, if these windows were rolled up, or if you were to look out this window, you would see where the proposed tallest building in the state of Rhode Island was supposed to be built. It has not come to fruition at this point, obviously, although the developer says he's still committed to the city. So, Mr. Cuervo, starting with you, walk us through your vision for what this land should look like, and specifically, how do we kind of get out of this, situation where we're waiting for all of this land to be developed by one developer?
I think it goes beyond what my vision is. I think the vision originally for this land was that it was going to be an economic development engine. There was going to be life sciences, there was going to be a variety of different opportunities to develop it as commercial development, as that would spur activity and spur economic momentum in our city. And what we've kind of defaulted is to a mindset where apartments are the solution, because apartments are what people are willing to build right now, luxury apartments, heavily subsidized luxury apartments. And I'm not necessarily sure that that is a bad thing. I think we need to have a little more self-esteem as a city. And I fear that we get so excited when we hear the possibility of any type of major development that we are willing to go along with proposals simply because it's something that's happening, simply because it represents momentum, and not because it may necessarily represent the best and highest use of some of the most remarkable land in our city, and I would argue even in our state. And this, well, I would say that extends all the way down to what we now know as a working waterfront. Like, this is remarkable, pristine land that we should be developing to its highest and best use. And I'm not necessarily sure that this endless cycle of wanting to build apartment buildings is that use.
Mr. Solomon, I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit just to point out this deal has already been approved for this property. So as mayor, it is going to be your job in some ways to help it move forward. And so I'm curious how you would approach that.
Well, I think if you go by the planning commission, they rejected it, if I'm not mistaken. Sharon, is that true?
Yeah, they were opposed. There was an opposition.
Well,
to
I
some
will
degree,
say
but
this. I did say 5 years ago, if you looked out the window today, 5 years later, you wouldn't see it built. So I'm not even sure this is going to get built. And I think if you looked at all the reports from contractors, they would say it wasn't feasible enough to build. The numbers just didn't work on it. So I question if this building is really going to get built.
So just to follow up on that, though, Mr. Solomon, let's hypothetically say it can't happen or it won't happen. What are you going to do to make sure something gets built there?
Listen, we'll go out and we'll reach out to contractors and developers. We have enough good developers in our state that can develop that land. I mean, you're seeing it around here now that property's getting developed on the other side of the highway. They're all local developers. So we could work with these developers, and I'm sure we can get something done over here. So I'm not too concerned about putting that out there and having it marketed for a developer to develop it.
Mr. Smiley, same idea. You're going to be the mayor, and you're kind of being dealt this hand. So how are you going to play it?
Yeah, so this developer has a history now of missing deadlines, of renegotiating terms. I think a lot of people question the economics of the building. And so, I hate to be negative, but my nightmare scenario as mayor is that we get a half-built building and the city gets thrown the keys. And so, that to me is the worst possible outcome. And so what I would ensure is before a shovel goes in the ground, that the developer and the development team has all of the appropriate bonding and insurance, that the financing is rock solid, and that we get a completed building should he go forward at the conclusion of the legal process, which is still working its way through. And then if it doesn't get built, to work with the 195 Commission. The city has been stripped of most of its authority through the 195 process, and I would like to see the city regain some authority in that process. But I do reject the notion that just building residential is not economic development or is not jobs. Since the commission was founded, the economy has changed dramatically, and this blended work, partial remote work is here to stay. And so we have members of the Jewelry District Association whose office is in a residential unit in the Jewelry District. We have people who work from home regularly, and that is in fact their workplace. And those are great, high-paying, high-skilled jobs that I want to see continue to grow and thrive in our community. And so I'm not closing the door to residential. What I do think is important is that we build with an eye towards not just efficiencies for students, but rather places where working professionals, adults, and families can live as well.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Ms. LaFortune, I believe on the council you were against this project initially when you voted. So it's going to be in your lap if you're the mayor, so how will you handle it?
So what was presented before the council was an ordinance, and it was a zoning ordinance to change the zoning for that parcel of land. which was quite problematic for me because we do have a comprehensive zoning plan in the city of Providence. Not only was that a problem, there wasn't any type of environmental study to even see if that structure, that magnitude, could even be sustained by the land that it's on. And there wasn't any market study to determine if that's the need of the city of Providence. So for me, it was an easy no. I do understand that that was an opportunity to bring jobs into the city, but when we think about development, we have to make smart decisions when it comes to development. I also tried to introduce an amendment to the ordinance, and in the amendment to the ordinance, because I knew that I didn't have enough votes to vote it down, which would require the developer to allocate a certain percentage of the units to affordable housing or pay in lieu of. Also, they would have to invest in green space because we need more green spaces in the city of Providence. And there was a sunset clause. So if the developer did not stop building in the time frame that they said they would build, that the deal would be off. And it was voted down. That's not smart development. That's not smart decision. Excuse me. So the only person here who had to make the tough decision is me. And as mayor, I'm going to hold whoever's trying to do business in Providence accountable. And we also need to make sure that the decisions that we make sense for the city, but they're smart decisions, smart economic and development decisions for the city of Providence.
Thank you, Ms. LaFortune. There's one more, there are a lot of big development projects I'd love to talk about, but I want to move on to other topics. One more, though, on this, starting with Mr. Solomon. There's lots of talk about moving many of the buses kind of down the street, down Doran Street, to a new facility and moving many buses out of Kennedy Plaza. So two parts for you. Do you support the project that is proposed for down the street? And then, if so, what do you want to see the future of Kennedy Plaza look like?
Well, first of all, the move would be a most welcome move with the businesses that are in the area. I think most of the business people in the area agree that it needs to be moved away from Kennedy Plaza. And I think if you look at Kennedy Plaza, there's a few things we can do at Kennedy Plaza. We can do additional parking if we need parking, but taking it and using it as a park, maybe moving the ice skating rink over to Kennedy Plaza, then taking the property where the ice skating rink is and develop it into something else, where the ice skating rink could be the central focal point of Kennedy Plaza. So that is one of the plans that I've seen in the past that I thought was real good. As far as an inside hub for the bus station, I think that could work with mixed use, retail, and office in the same building. I've seen those blueprints, and I think they look pretty good. That's something I'd be open to and probably support.
Thank you. Mr. Smiley, your thoughts on moving the bus hub essentially down the street and then also the future of Kennedy Plaza?
Yeah, so I support the proposal for the new Garrahy bus hub. I think it works for transit riders, and I think it works for drivers. We need amenities in that building, bathrooms for both passengers and for drivers. There's a real opportunity to do housing above, which is great. The current proposal actually calls for additional structured parking. I think we should look at that with some skepticism and question ourselves. We've got multiple garages all within view of this location that are 3/4 empty right now, and so before we build additional structured parking, I think we should do a new parking assessment. But all in all, it's a good proposal, and I support it. As for Kennedy Plaza, I mean, this conversation has to take place in context with the redevelopment plans for 111 Westminster Street, the Superman building. I mean, that, as it was said in the press conference today, is the kind of the front doorstep of that building. And so the programming that's happened in Burnside Park over the last couple of years is terrific, but we have a terrible track record in our city where we spend money on infrastructure sometimes, but we never spend money on maintenance and upkeep and programming. And so, you know, I remember talking to Cliff Wood from the Providence Foundation about this, that, you know, like, we should never do a press conference ever again that there isn't as much money put aside towards maintenance and upkeep as there is towards the project itself. Because if we can't do that, then we know we're not going to properly care for our public spaces. And so as we determine the future of Kennedy Plaza in conjunction with the redeveloped Superman building, it needs to have a viable, sustainable, robust plan for programming, maintenance, and upkeep so that what we do have, we properly care for.
Thank you. Ms. LaFortune, on moving the bus hub and then also the future of Kennedy Plaza.
So I'm a bus rider. I could tell you stories about riding the bus when I was in high school trying to get to school on a daily basis. So this is an issue that I've been talking to many of the riders throughout the city. And what has come up repeatedly is that they just want to be engaged, and it has to be wherever the bus hub is moved, and I do think that that's an ideal location. It has to make sense for the riders. It should increase ridership. It should be accessible. There should be clean facilities. Also, we should maintain the area, and it should be safe. Right now, Kennedy Plaza is not the Kennedy Plaza when it was redeveloped. And so there is an opportunity there to create more green space, again, in the city of Providence, that can be used, especially as we are moving forward with, as long as everything goes through accordingly at the city council level with the Superman building. But it's an opportunity to create more green space in the city. But I do support having a more accessible bus hub that is green, that is accessible for all riders, that is safe, and that can increase ridership.
Mr. Cuervo, bus hub, and then also the future KP.
I think moving the bus hub makes sense if it meets the needs of current and future riders. I think I agree with the councilwoman on a lot of her points. I think it's important for us to look at this type of infrastructure from the lens of how it impacts the people who use it. Because a lot of the conversations that we've had around Kennedy Plaza revolve around people feeling uncomfortable because there are other types of people that occupy Kennedy Plaza that we might not feel comfortable around. And I think that's a very incorrect lens at looking at. We need to increase ridership, and this we need to look at multimodal transportation. We need to continue to invest in that. And I think there's an opportunity to develop Kennedy Plaza both as green space and also as an attraction for the many people who visit our city.
Mr. Smiley, I want to touch on something you were discussing before, this kind of future of work, and we're seeing it in this building. We're certainly seeing it all throughout downtown. A lot of buildings are empty. I was talking to a downtown business owner today who relies heavily on foot traffic, and she told me that her business is down 70% during the pandemic, and basically the only reason she's been able to stay open is because of some of the government loans and things that have kept her afloat. What are you as mayor going to do to actually help the small businesses, particularly in downtown, but all across the city?
Yeah, it's a major issue, and it is particularly hitting our downtown hard. And so I think this question of what is the future of work is evolving. Nobody really knows for sure. I think some version of blended work is likely to stay, but it's still evolving. From what I hear from restaurants and the hoteliers and business owners in general is that nights and weekends are coming back. I think we've all experienced the impact of the convention center and PPAC and Trinity and these great kind of anchor amenities in our city, and we felt their absence, and now we're seeing the benefit of their resurgence. But the weekday business is really slow, and so the city needs to help these businesses retool, reinvent themselves to serve the needs of the people who are living here. Downtown has been on a transition to a new residential neighborhood for our city. And we're starting to see those amenities to support real downtown living pop up. Some of the members of the Drury District Association who are here are kind of the early pioneers before there was ready access to a supermarket. Buff's building a new market next to where Lupo's was, Rory's, which will open soon. Don't call it a Trader Joe's will be opening very soon. Exactly. And so we're starting to have these amenities that will support the continued growth and expansion of residential living downtown, which I think is part of the solution. And then we need to think about economic development tools to help these businesses adapt to serve new customers. When I was working for Governor Raimondo, we worked hard during the pandemic, whether it was the Take It Outside grants or some of the other pandemic-specific grants to help businesses both readapt and survive. And post-pandemic, we're going to have to roll out a new suite of those programs as well to help them reinvent themselves.
Ms. LaFortune, I owe you a little bit of time, so tell me a little bit about your kind of vision for the small businesses in this city.
So I grew up with a small business owner. My great uncle had a tailor shop right in the West End. And I grew up spending time with him there. I'm also a big supporter of our small businesses. Number one, during the holidays, they are the only businesses that will wrap for free. So I shop at all my small businesses in the city. So some of the things that I worked on as a city council person, particularly during this pandemic, was to support our restaurant industry, our restaurant and hospitality industry. I actually passed a third-party legislation. I worked with the state. Actually, it was passed in the state. I introduced it at city council, but worked in conjunction with the state to ensure that it passed to protect our small businesses from predatory third parties, because they're already struggling, and many of these restaurants were getting charged fees that they didn't know about, or they found out later on that they were part of a contract that they didn't sign up for. I also met with many of our small businesses. I met with many of our restaurants to hear some of their concerns, and I too participated in Take It Outside, encourage my community to do so as well. One of the things that we have to do to bring some of the businesses back alive in the city of Providence is really work on various campaigns to get people to patron our small businesses. But we can't just think about the small businesses in the downtown area, because this pandemic also impacted small businesses in every single neighborhood in Providence. Many of them closed down and they were unable to open. So it's about using some of this ARPA funding, and one of the recommendations is also investing in our small businesses to help them get back on their feet, creating more opportunities so that they can seek people outdoors, providing opportunities with the permitting, but also as a city working with arts, culture, and tourism to really have a mechanism, a comprehensive plan to attract people to the downtown area, into our neighborhoods, to spend money and support our small businesses.
Thank you, Ms. LaFortune. Mr. Cuervo, there's a lot of money available, and there's a lot of ideas for how to spend it. How would you spend it for small businesses?
I mean, I think we need to continue to support small businesses so that they're viable and they can evolve to meet the changing needs of their customer base. You know, change happens, and sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's difficult, but it spurs innovation. And we have an opportunity to invest in that innovation. But simultaneously, what we also have to do is we need to change the perceptions around our city. And a lot of folks don't come to the city because they're afraid, because they think their car's going to get broke into, they think they're going to witness an act of violence in the broad daylight. And we need to change these perceptions. I think we should be working closely with partners in the tourism industry and folks like the Providence, Warwick Visitor and Convention Bureaus to really bolster and put together an ad campaign and just a feel-good campaign so that people begin to regain some confidence in coming to the city. I hear this all the time. I hear this from folks that they're afraid of coming into the city, they're afraid of going to Federal Hill, they're afraid of visiting some of our neighborhoods. And perception becomes reality, and this has a multiplier effect. And so yes, we need to invest in our small businesses, but we also need to make people feel good about Providence. Providence has faced a plethora of problems over years. We know that 20 years ago, when we were celebrating the Renaissance, Providence had potentially more headaches than it did today, but yet we were all celebrating the Renaissance, and we were all coming downtown and celebrating the fabulous restaurants. We need to capture that essence and bring it back.
Mr. Solomon, you recently sold your restaurant. Congratulations.
I did.
You are a small business owner and have been. I know others are too. What do you see day to day, and what will you do as mayor to help the small businesses?
First of all, I was a small business owner for 40 years, so I know how tough it is to get up for 40 years early in the morning, try to be a one-man show to do the shopping, do the buying, do the hiring, do the selling. It's a challenge to small businesses. And that's why, for me, any assistance we can give small businesses, whether it's through a one-stop shop where we could assist them with zoning, we could assist them with, permitting, assist them with licensing. That's what we need to do as a city. I mean, small businesses is the backbone of our city. They employ more people than any other industry in the city of Providence. I mean, if you go up and down Broad Street, there's more small businesses in that area probably than there are people in downtown Providence. So we need to be helpful, and we need to be there for them, these small businesses, when they need our help. And that's how we can expand small business in our city. And we have to work with them. We need to, run programs. You could be the best baker in the world. You may not know how to run a bakery. So this is where we have to have programs in place to help people that want to open up small businesses also. And I think that's how we can be helpful.
Thank you. All right, let's move to public safety. This question's from Ms. LaFortune, but Ms. LaFortune, Mr. Cuervo just made a really important point that I think a lot of people are aware of, that kind of perception is reality in this city. And right now, the perception is, I think Joe Palino had an op-ed in the Providence Journal. Crime is out of control. And there are metrics that actually back that up, right? There was a spike in homicides last year. We are seeing, police are taking hundreds of guns off the streets the last couple of years. What's the number one thing you're going to do as mayor to change the perception that this city is too violent?
So we've seen a spike in violence, not only in the city of Providence, but throughout the nation, but we live here, right? So it's really important to us. I'm a parent, and not only am I a parent and I want to see my children able to walk down the street, my daughter bikes home from school or walks home from school in the afternoons, but I want to also make sure that whoever's coming to our city, whoever has a business in our city, also feels safe. So one of the things I already did was I actually introduced a resolution calling for our public safety to put together a comprehensive public safety plan that meets the needs of every single neighborhood throughout the city of Providence. We know that we've seen a spike in violence. We can also say there could be some correlations between the pandemic and then the increase of violence throughout the city. But we also have to have a strong public safety plan to address it. We need to make sure that we have a public safety infrastructure where there's community policing and it's deeply rooted in the community. I've talked about having foot patrol. I've actually had community meetings and asking for more officers on foot in the community talking to people. We also need to have a crisis response initiative, which I actually worked on the framework. And in July, the city announced that we're launching a crisis response initiative in the city of Providence so that we can respond to non-violence incidents, whether it's someone who's homeless, having a crisis, when that's what it's called for, and we could connect people to services. We also need to make investments in the city, in our neighborhoods, in our youth, to prevent these violence from the violence from happening. That means supporting summer jobs and development opportunities, which I've been a strong advocate for. So there's changing the perception in terms of having a comprehensive safety plan, but also making safety mitigations throughout the city of Providence. But we also have to do more in preventing the violence from happening in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. Cuervo, you talked about the perception. You know it's very real. How, as mayor, are you going to kind of inspire confidence in the people in this room and residents all over across the city to make sure that they don't feel unsafe when they're in the city?
Well, I have a little bit of experience in this because many years ago in my previous life, when I was communications director during the Cicilline administration, I was part of the team that helped the police roll out their very successful, at the time, community policing initiative. And we were able to learn from that process, and we learned from the things that we got right, that the city got right, and we learned from some of the things that we could have improved. I think it's important for us to adopt many of the tactics of community policing without necessarily having to create a framework of community policing. The fundamental premise of community policing is that people in neighborhoods get to know the officers that are assigned to their neighborhoods. And this breaks down whatever barriers may exist, and those relationships can help improve that perception and the reality of public safety in our neighborhoods. I think Councilwoman LaFortune deserves accolades for her work in crisis response. I've said it many times. I was quoted in a recent op-ed. We aren't going to hire our way out of crime. We're not going to solve crime by hiring 500, 600, 700 police officers. We need to have proper staffing in the police department. We need to have policing that is responsive and accountable to the community it serves. But we also need to make significant investments in neighborhood economic development, in wraparound services, and in youth programming. because we need to create opportunities for our youth to find alternatives so that they don't choose the path that leads to a life of crime and violence. This is a reality that impacts people. You know, not everybody in Providence has the opportunity to hang out at a beautiful building like the CIC. There's a lot of need in our community. I think we need to be responsive to that need.
Though we would welcome everybody in this building if they would like to be.
Yes, we would.
Mr. Solomon, talk about that perception that Providence is out of control with crime and how you're going to address it.
There's no question that's the perception in Providence right now. And for me, I look at it as a five-prong approach. I don't think there's one silver bullet that we can put out there and say, this is how we're going to solve crime. I think we have to look at a bunch of various different approaches. First and foremost, we need funding a perpetual police academy to get to the level of policing that we need for our neighborhoods.
What number
Is
do you
that
think
level,
that is?
whether it's 450, whether it's 500. I mean, we've had 500 at one time. So we need to get to that level where there's a presence out there. We need to expand our community policing, which we need to get cops out into the neighborhoods, work in the neighborhoods, meeting the people and the businesses in the neighborhoods. That's very important. We need to teach our kids at a young age how to mediate conflicts and disputes, so maybe put it in a school curriculum for young students. We need to have job programs for the young kids. We need to get them off the streets. And more importantly, on gun control. And we've banged our heads on what to do and what not to do. What I would propose is have a mandatory jail sentence or prison sentence for somebody caught with an illegal gun in the city of Providence. You send that message out, and you'll see how fast people be leaving the city with guns. You won't be seeing that happen in the city of Providence.
Just to
You
be
make
clear,
it
though,
that
Mr.
way.
Solomon, you wouldn't have the ability to do that. So
Well, we go to the General Assembly and fight for it. But I mean, that's something I'd be willing to fight for.
Mr. Smiley, last one for you. Well, on this issue.
Yeah,
Perception.
The perception of a lack of safety in Providence is an issue that I've been outspoken about throughout my candidacy. I've been very clear about that policing is not the solution entirely, but the solution starts with policing. It starts with making sure the police have the staffing and tools and support that they need to do their job and keep us safe. We do need to continue to invest in alternatives, behavioral health response teams, the 911 diversion pilot program that's going on right now. But it's also not, we haven't talked about it, I'm surprised, it's not just about violent crime and shootings, although those are very concerning, but it's also the ATVs and the motorcycles and the other sense of, areas of kind of sense of lawlessness that's taking place in our city and that's bad for business and makes it a place that people don't want to come to right now. And so, just last week, I held a press conference outside of the public safety complex calling on, we recently graduated 40 or 50 recruits from an academy. There's a net new, about 40 new officers. And I recommended assigning additional officers to the gun task force, assigning additional officers to the investigative division to help solve some of these crimes, and sending an entirely new message in a press conference a whole year ago around ATVs and illegal dirt bikes in our city, which is zero tolerance for these. They're all illegal. None of them are allowed to be on city streets. A lot of those riders are not from Providence. They come to Providence because there's a perception that they can get away with it. Our police, other people have all experienced the disrespect that they surround police officers and flip them the bird because they feel like nothing's ever going to happen to them, and we need to send an entirely different message. The other thing that was the start of this question, which is how do we restore a sense of safety? How do we change this perception, which is a major issue? Providence is the economic heart of Rhode Island. The region, really. People come from New Bedford and Fall River from throughout to come to our fabulous restaurants, to go to PPAC, to go to the convention center, to go to the Dunk. We need to also provide a visible show of safety and security. That doesn't have to be just police officers, although they're a part of the solution, but even things as simple as the Yellow Jackets through the DID provide a sense of security and safety to those who are visiting our city. So should we be looking for ways to enhance and invest in maybe the expansion of the DID to provide people who appear to be in a position of authority so that visitors to our beautiful city can know that they're safe? Because by and large, by the way, I think they are safe.
Okay, let's just jump to a quick question, very quick answer for all, a question from all of you. We'll start with Mr. Cuervo. Will you, as mayor, have both a public safety commissioner and a chief of police?
I think We need to have a chief of police who has the confidence and freedom to do their job. And I think the role of public safety commissioner should not be that of overseer of the chief and decider for the chief. I think this is Providence. This is not a major metropolitan city with hundreds of precincts.
Just though, to be clear, you will have two of them. You'll just have different kind of roles for them.
I don't think we need a public safety commissioner.
Mr. Solomon, public safety commissioner and police chief, or one or the other?
I would say yes, just so you have checks and balances. We've had, in the past, we've had some police chiefs that were a little rogue, to say the least, and I don't want to mention names. So it's always good to have a public safety commissioner that is overlooking them.
Mr. Smiley.
I plan on having both, and I do not plan on having a public safety commissioner also be the fire chief.
Ms. LaFortune.
A police chief and a fire chief. I don't necessarily think that we need a public safety commissioner. We could use those funding in other areas, like further support our crisis response initiative or increase safety mitigations throughout the city of Providence so that we can change the perception and make our city safer.
We should give a thumbs up or thumbs down because two of you mentioned it. We haven't had a fire chief in this city since 2015. So thumbs up, yes, or thumbs down, no on a fire chief. Okay, good. Everybody supports a fire chief. All right, let's have some fun really quick with some quick hitter questions. Let's really try to be kind of yes or no, or yeah, mostly yes or no here. Starting with Mr. Solomon, if the question goes on the ballot, would you support an elected school board, yes or no?
No.
Mr. Smiley?
No.
Ms. LaFortune?
A hybrid model.
A hybrid model, okay. Mr. Cuervo?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Smiley, if the question goes on the ballot, would you support at-large city council members?
Yes.
Ms. LaFortune?
Yes.
Mr. Cuervo?
No.
No. Mr.
Yes.
Solomon? All right. And to be clear, at-large city council members would be at least partially having citywide elected city council members in addition to ward, your regular council people. Ms. LaFortune, who are you supporting for governor?
That's like asking me my age.
21.
I've been so busy with my own mayoral race. I need to assess all the candidates, and I will make a determination. But right now, I haven't decided who yet.
Mr. Cuervo, who are you supporting for governor?
I'm planning on voting for a person I worked very closely with for 6 years and who turned a sleepy back office into a national leader in election reform and transparency around lobbying. That's current Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea.
Mr. Solomon, who are you supporting for governor?
It depends who's supporting me for mayor.
All of them, then. Mr. Smiley, who are you supporting for governor?
I don't plan on publicly endorsing any candidate for governor.
That's fair. Mr. Cuervo, do you support driving privileges for undocumented residents?
I do, because it's a public safety issue that impacts everybody.
Mr. Solomon, driving privileges for undocumented residents?
I would say yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Absolutely.
Ms. LaFortune?
I'm a formerly undocumented resident of Providence, so absolutely.
Mr. Solomon, would you support a nightlife district in Providence? This is something that's been floated by the Board of Licenses chairman.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would.
Mr.
I'd have the nightlife director too.
Mr. Smiley, excuse me, nightlife district in Providence.
Not as a designated zone, but I do think the city needs to do a better job of actually planning for it and coordinating nightlife activities through the office, as Frank Latore used to talk about the other 9 to 5.
Yeah. Ms. LaFortune?
I actually was part of many of the conversations and meetings around creating a nightlife in Providence, and Mr. Anthony actually submitted a proposal in some safety measures to ensure that we're safe. So I certainly would like to see a more robust and safe nightlife in the city of Providence, not necessarily a dedicated zoning area, but I think there's more conversations to be had about it.
All right. Mr. Cuervo, nightlife district in Providence.
I think of everybody at this table, I have the most experience enjoying Providence and nightlife throughout my life. So I think I would support a nightlife district and a night mayor or night administrator, most certainly a comprehensive plan on how to integrate this other half of the economy when many of us are in bed. that's generating jobs and economic activity.
Mr. Smiley, where's the best place to get a lemon ice in Providence?
Mr. Lemon in the North End?
Ms. LaFortune?
A lemon ice, of course, Mr. Lemon.
Mr. Lemon it is.
Mr. Solomon?
I can't answer that question.
No answer.
No answer on that one.
The answer was right. It's Mr. Lemon. Moving along, let's talk about education. Starting with Ms. LaFortune, do you support the appointment of Javier Montañez as the superintendent?
So this is the first time in my lifetime, since being a part of the Providence Public Schools, I still am, that I have seen a superintendent that has actually gone through our school district, was a teacher, then became an administrator, and now serves as the superintendent. I do think it's wonderful to have him, but I also think that the process wasn't inclusive of the community. If we're making such a critical decision and you don't have the stakeholders as part of the decision-making process, I do believe that's a bit problematic. And no matter how qualified that person is, but we didn't have a fair process and we didn't have an open process.
Mr. Cuervo, Superintendent Montañez.
I think Dr. Montañez is a fantastic superintendent. I think he could do a fantastic job if he's given the resources and the freedom to act, and if he's not micromanaged to the nth degree. I have a lot of hope for him, and I have a lot of hope for our schools.
Mr. Solomon, how do you feel about the new superintendent?
I think the fact that he worked his way up the ranks and he was given this opportunity, I have to believe that it was well-deserved, and I'm putting my confidence in him right now until I see otherwise.
Mr. Smiley, the new superintendent.
Yeah, I support him as well. I think from what I've heard, the teachers feel like they're being heard. Students look up to him, and he seems like a very calming influence in the midst of a lot of turmoil.
There's a chance, Mr. Cuervo, I'll start with you. There's a chance that you'll be the mayor when control of Providence schools is given back from the state to the city. And that means negotiating a teachers union contract. What's the number one thing you would change about the current teachers union contract?
I think we need to have a focus on longer school day, longer school year, and a philosophical approach that treats the contract and our approach to education as something that revolves around teaching and learning. Conversations that impact our youth directly, and instead of conversations that tend to revolve around the adults in the room.
Mr. Solomon.
I think we need to have more accountability with our teachers. I think it's very important. Also, the same thing with our schools, principals. Right now, there doesn't seem to be any accountability. So I think we need that. Someone needs to be accountable for the schools. Somebody needs to be accountable for the classrooms. And I think right now, teachers are being protected from being accountable. And teachers not being placed on merit. They're being placed because they got seniority or they've been around for a long time. So I think we need to change the culture of our teachers and make them more accountable.
Mr. Smiley, you've negotiated this contract partially, so what would you change about it?
So, we have a contract right now that is horribly detailed, that manages every moment of the day and life of the teacher and therefore the students in the classroom. We need a teacher that is much more flexible, that treats our teachers like the skilled professionals that they are, that rewards the excellent ones, and that allows for accountability for those who aren't meeting the mark and puts the students first. And so a contract that's focused on professionalism and treating our teachers like the skilled professionals that they are and should continue to be.
And Ms. LaFortune.
What I would like to see change in the contract is for us to address the absenteeism issue. I'm a parent. Many parents in Providence have experienced in many of their schools where teachers are absent. Also providing more space and opportunities for teacher development, and also creating some sort of pipeline to attract new teachers to teach in the city of Providence, and that also reflects the student body that they're teaching. We need a teacher residency program We're having a major retention issue right now. And Boston has had a teacher residency program for years now, and it's been able to attract more diverse teachers, and they stay in the teaching field for a longer period of time. So I think within the contract, there needs to be more accountability around absenteeism, more room to allow teachers to prepare to teach, and also more opportunities to attract new teachers into the teaching field.
Thanks, Ms. LaFortune. There's been a kind of constant debate in the last couple of years about school resource officers in Providence schools, police officers in usually the middle and high schools. So, Mr. Solomon, yes or no, do you support SROs in schools?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
I support letting the principal make the decision of what's best for their school.
Ms. LaFortune?
I passed legislation calling for an increase in social emotional support in the schools because that's what the students as well as teachers are calling for, and to eliminate SROs. There are studies. I have my graduate degree in urban education policy. My thesis was focused on SROs. And what the data is showing us is that it doesn't change the culture in schools. What does improve student achievement is social emotional support within the schools.
Mr. Cuervo, do you support SROs in schools?
I spent some time last year as a substitute teacher at Mount Pleasant High School, and I was able to see firsthand the interaction between the SROs there and the students and the faculty. And my impression is, based on that and based on research that the councilwoman mentions and what I've been able to read, I do not support the continuation of SROs in our schools.
You guys always get asked questions about charter schools. The truth is there are lots of charter seats coming to Providence, and it's sort of out of your control whether or not you can have them. What I would ask each of you, starting with Mr. Smiley, is would you support reducing the number of charter school seats in the city of Providence?
Only if the charter school is not outperforming the traditional public school. I think charters, high-quality charters, are a very important option for families in Providence. I think we should be doing everything possible to provide the best education for our kids in the public school setting, and if that's in a charter school, so be it. Not every charter school makes the mark, and so those seats should be eliminated when their charters come up for review. But so long as they're outperforming the traditional public schools, I'd like to see those seats remain and even expand.
Ms. LaFortune, on charter schools.
So I actually have been a part of a charter school. I did my undergraduate study in Philadelphia, and while there, my son was in a charter school. He was in a Spanish immersion program and learned how to speak fluent Spanish. But my son also has an IEP and also was receiving services in school for speech therapy. I will say, when he was at the school in Philadelphia, my son received wrapped around services in the schools. When we moved to Providence, although we brought a full IEP report, it took me 4 years to get a 504B plan for my son. 4 years. And I had to actually sought out speech therapy for him outside of the school. And luckily I had insurance to be able to provide for him. So I do think that there are models within the charter school structure that we can implement within our school districts, but charter schools do not address our current educational problems. Because at the end of the day, there are only so many seats at the charter schools, and there's still going to be kids in the neighborhoods that don't have access to it.
Mr. Cuervo, charter schools, would you support fewer seats for charter schools in Providence?
Yesterday, I got a call from a friend who was concerned that she had applied for her child to enter into 6th grade, and at 3 different charter schools, he was put on the wait list. At one school, he was number 163 on a wait list. The reality is that the vast majority of our children in Providence will not win that lottery. They're going to go to a public school. So charter schools are an important tool in the toolkit, but we need to focus our energy on improving our public schools, because that's where the vast majority of our children are going to receive their education.
Mr. Solomon, on charter schools.
Well, obviously, like Brett said, you have some good ones, you have some bad ones. You try to weed out the bad ones, but I think, when you come to education, it's always good to have options. And some charter schools are very good, and I've supported some in the past, and I haven't supported some in the past. So I would say overall, I would reduce the ones that are not performing to a satisfactory level.
All right, we've got roughly 30 minutes left. I hope nobody's sleeping. We got a lot to get to still. So, Ms. LaFortune, on June 7th, Providence residents are going to be asked to approve a $515 million bond, pension obligation bond. Do you support the pension bond?
So I was a bit apprehensive last year around the pension obligation bond, but we do know that we have a $1.3 billion pension liability. And if we don't work towards resolving it, it's going to significantly, it has impact our city because 20% of our budget already is going into the pension to pay into the pension liability. We're at 22% funded, so we're at the critical state. My council colleague, Helen Anthony, and I actually held the first community meeting in the city of Providence to inform the community about the pension obligation bond. They went through a robust process, the committee. They did a stress test, and what they're showing is that this may be a good option in stabilizing our pension system. Now, it's not going to solve the problem fully, but we need to get to a point where we can stabilize the system to be able to move forward.
Mr. Cuervo on the pension bond.
So traditionally, pension obligation bonds have had a spotty record because what government entities have done is that they have borrowed money, and the cost of borrowing money has been so close to their expected rate of return on their investments that if there's any type of dip in the market, the city or state ends up underwater. I think that this new iteration of the pension obligation bond that the city has put forward has significant safeguards in place. As a matter of fact, some of those safeguards may make it a moot point if interest rates continue to rise at the level that they're raising. But I'm cautiously optimistic about it. But again, I believe that it's not such a simple solution. It has to be part of a greater approach to our pension woes.
Mr. Solomon on the pension bond.
As of right now, I oppose it. To me, it's a risk, and people may call it a small risk. Any risk is a risk, and the risk taxpayers' money at this point, and especially watching the market the last 3 months. I'm sure everybody has looked at their 401ks in the last 3 months. So if we were borrowing money right now, we'd be in big trouble. I look at that. I look at the fact that that becomes a liability, a debt to the city, which means any future borrowing that we do is going to affect the rate that we get, because right now that is not a liability to the city as far as debt service goes with bonds. But if we borrow that money, it becomes a debt to the city. So I think that becomes a problem. And I'm not sure I want to take that risk right now, especially with your money. I'm not sure I would take it with my own. If I'm not willing to do it with my money, I'm not sure I'd do it with your money.
Mr. Smiley, I know you have said this is kind of a tool in the toolbox, so I want you to talk about that, but also your idea for moving city employees into and retirees into the state pension fund.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So the pension obligation bond is not a solution in and of itself. It's shifting the liability that we all have as taxpayers from retirees to a liability owed to bondholders. We're just shifting the liability, and there may be the opportunity to make a little bit of money on the deal to save the city a little bit of money, but it's not a reform. So I think that we should get out of the local pension business and put ourselves into MERS. That's the state pension fund. The city pays its own lawyers, bankers, financial advisors to get the same advice that the state gets, which just creates waste in the system. It costs all of us. It further drains the system. If the pension obligation bond is a strategy or a tool to help us buy our way into MERS, then I think it's worth considering. But then we would be in a position where we're saving yearly costs in the form of these wasteful consulting fees and advisory fees, and we also would be protecting ourselves, all of us as taxpayers. The reason that we're in this mess is that 30 years ago, previous mayor signed pension benefits that were unaffordable from the get-go and then skipped payments. And by being in the state system, we could protect against not any of us, but some future mayor, after any of us have finished serving, from ever skipping payments again. because that's how we got into this jam. And because what the state would do then is they would deduct state aid or divert other state aid to make sure that the city made its own contribution. There's a half dozen communities in Rhode Island that are in the state system, and I think Providence should be as well.
To be clear, Mayor McGowan would also continue to make the payments. This is the question that Mr. Dahlberg's going to throw an apple at all of you guys. Pilot payments. Mr. Cuervo, we're coming up on renewed negotiations with all of the nonprofits when it comes to payments in lieu of taxes, right? And these are traditionally one-off deals that the city strikes with most of its major nonprofits. There's also state money and reimbursement money, but there are a couple of bills at the State House, Mr. Cuervo, that one would tax essentially non-mission essential properties like parking lots. And then there's another that would impose a 2% tax on a college's endowment. So do you support those pieces of legislation?
I support the legislation, and I think that they play a critical role in bringing this conversation to the forefront. I think our private colleges and universities add a lot to the city's fabric, but I also think that our individual taxpayers and homeowners and small businesses have carried an undue burden when 40% of our land is tax exempt. And I welcome the opportunity to have conversations about how we can have a mutually productive relationship between these institutions and the city that takes into account the fact that many of our taxpayers are burdened beyond capacity. I think we have to look to New Haven and Yale University and look at some of the innovative things they've been doing over the years as a model for us to follow here in Providence.
And I'm going to give everybody plenty of time on this, but I want to follow up with Mr. Cuervo. The pushback from the major nonprofits, Brown certainly, but I think the hospitals would say they provide a lot of uncompensated care, to residents of the city. Certainly, we would all agree that Providence would not be Providence without its colleges. So what do you say to the nonprofits that say, we already do plenty?
It all depends what plenty means. I think there's a reality. Sure, Brown University brings prestige, it brings research dollars, it brings economic development, but it also brings gentrification, it also brings rising costs, it also brings an additional burden to our city services. We have to look at the big picture. We can't just say, this is like a person who owns a restaurant and has a celebrity who comes every week and eats for free, and it's fantastic to have the celebrity eating at your restaurant. It brings a lot of prestige, but eventually the bills add up and somebody has to pay. And I think we need to continue to look at this, and again, I would say, this isn't something that we have to recreate the wheel. There are other models, and again, New Haven and Yale have a model. Maybe there are pieces of that we can adopt. Maybe there are pieces that don't fit into our particular scenario. New Haven is a much smaller city. It's about the size of Warwick, but it has an unfunded pension liability of nearly $1 billion. So we should be looking to them. They're not that far away. It's not that hard to look them up.
Mr. Solomon, those two bills at the State House, the one that would tax essentially non-mission essential properties, the other one that would be a 2% tax on a college's endowment. Do you support either of those bills?
I support taxing the colleges, but I will tell you, it's going to take an act of Congress to get Brown University to pay property taxes, and I think we all know that. But in principle, I do support some type of payment. What the formula may be, I'm not sure, but I definitely do support some type of payment. And I know we've negotiated with Brown in the past for money in lieu of taxes for services, and we came up with some, agreement, and I think it's ending this year. We had a 10-year agreement with Brown that's probably going to end this year, so that would probably have to go for renegotiation. But I think, they need to pay more because their footprint also is a lot bigger than it was 10 years ago.
And as mayor, you would negotiate for more money?
I would put some kind of formula together for more money. Absolutely, absolutely.
Mr. Smiley, those two bills, first question.
So the growth of the nonprofits has placed a severe financial burden on the city, and renegotiating the pilot agreements with the colleges and the universities is one of the most important things the next mayor can do. The proliferation of what was called non-mission property is a major issue, and when I served as Governor Raimondo's chief of staff, we were able to actually put into the state budget a proposal to tax non-mission buildings. Brown owns a lot of buildings or a lot of property on Thayer Street. They pay commercial taxes on those properties, but not all the nonprofits do. The hospitals in particular, Lifespan in particular, owns several office buildings in South Providence that are full of profit-making doctors' practices, and they're tax exempt. If you look across the river to the new University Orthopedics building in East Providence, they pay full commercial property taxes to the city of East Providence, but the office buildings in South Providence pay no taxes at all because they're owned by Lifespan. And Dan, you referenced that the hospitals provide uncompensated care. That's really not an argument anymore. Most Rhode Islanders have insurance, and the few that don't the hospitals get direct federal subsidies from the federal government under the Affordable Care Act. And so the old tired argument of we provide uncompensated care and that's why we deserve to be nonprofit just doesn't hold water anymore. And so I'm looking forward to these negotiations. I think it's of vital importance. And I look forward to striking a deal that is, in fact, more money than the city is currently.
Just one follow-up on that. Fair enough on the uncompensated care. The other argument that plenty of people, certainly at Brown University, would say is, boy, we do a lot for this city. Again, what would the city be without Brown? So what do you say to that?
By the way, I agree with that. I would kind of say somewhat flippantly, apologies to anyone for Bridgeport, but for Brown and RISD, Providence would be Bridgeport. I mean, this is part of our economic vitality. It's part of the uniqueness, the quality of place here. It's a huge and important employer. That is all absolutely true. I value our institutions significantly. It's part of what makes our city so special. That said, their growth continues to shift the burden onto the rest of the taxpayers in the city. And so we can and should do better.
Ms. LaFortune, this idea of taxing the nonprofits in some way, do you support those bills that are currently at the State House?
So 2 years ago, I actually introduced and passed legislation for us to do a full assessment of the pilot programs. The current pilot programs amongst all the nonprofits in the city of Providence. I do think that our nonprofits can do more in paying their fair share. I also think that there could be more work that's done in partnering with the city of Providence and trying to address some of our needs, like education. We have Brown, we have URI in the city, we have Johnson & Wales, we have Rick, we have PC. I mean, Rick and URI are both state institutions, but with Brown, we have Brown Summer School, which I went to when I was a kid, but yet we don't have any shared data to see what impact that it has had on our students. With Johnson & Wales, this is an opportunity not only for them to pay more taxes, but also create a pipeline for our high school kids, similar to a program in Philadelphia in Saul High School, where you can create a pathway for our young people to go in the restaurant hospitality industry. So I do think there's certainly more opportunity for more investments. We need to do a full assessment and get the report back in how these pilots have been working. Clearly, we still have about 40% of our properties that are not being taxed, so more can be done. But we also need to see how we can have direct impact on the city of Providence and its residents.
Just to follow up, though, I think your state rep is Rebecca Kislak. I think your state senator is Sam Zurier.
Yep.
How would you tell them to vote on those two bills?
So in terms of those two bills, the first one in terms of taxing, I do think that they should vote yes. The 2%, we do have to have a bit more conversation around it. I work in higher education. I've been an administrator in higher education for over 15 years. Not only am I an administrator, have overseen centers, employed individuals, create plans, but I also advise students. And the students that I serve are students from historically underrepresented backgrounds, students who come from disadvantaged communities. And for some of them, the only way that they're able to afford to go to college is through the endowments. So I think we do have to be a bit careful to ensure that we're not directly impacting students' ability to go to an institution like Brown or go into an institution like PC. But we certainly should reassess the current pilot program and our tax structure overall.
All right. We are rounding up on time, so I want to be super quick here, and these are going to be a couple of complicated questions, but please be quick. Mr. Solomon, There are two kind of signature initiatives that Mayor Lorza has promoted in recent years. One is this municipal reparations process. The other is a guaranteed income program for certain city residents. Do you intend to continue one or both of those programs when you're mayor?
Dan, you were doing so good today. You had to ask me those questions. Actually, I would probably take a look at them because I know they were pilot programs. So at the present time, I would say that I'm not sure I would continue them. I think, and I've never been a firm believer of throwing money at a problem solves that problem. So if we do have a problem, there's some underlying problems, I think we need to find out what's causing them, and I think we could address it through a more diplomatic way than just throwing money at the problem.
Mr. Smiley, you've had some thoughts on both of these programs recently. So would you continue those programs when you're mayor?
So I think with respect to universal basic income, I think we should let that is a study that I think we should let it conclude, let it run its course. But I've said that this is the example of the kind of thing that I think is a distraction. It's an important policy question, but it's better left to either philanthropy or the state government, the federal government to explore this. I think it has caused confusion at the State House about what the city's resources are, and I just think it's been a distraction. With respect to the municipal reparations program, you know, I've got a lot of respect for the work that's been done and for those who are engaged in the process. I know that there's an important chapter ahead, which is the next steps, and so I look forward to listening to that committee, to the Mayor's African American Ambassadors Group, to hear their thoughts on where do we go from here and how do we take the next steps in that process.
Ms. LaFortune, on municipal reparations and then a guaranteed income program.
So I want to preference in this way. So we live in a city that's quite segregated, and there are significant disparities. In fact, I represent a ward in the city of Providence in where my mother, both my parents were CNAs. My mom is disabled now. My father is turning 74 next month, and he still works as a certified nursing assistant. But my mother worked in someone's home, cleaning their home and taking care of the elderly. So there are real disparities within the city of Providence. When we talk about reparation, and I'm not sure if reparation is the right word because we think about African American communities, but we live in a city with a diverse Black, Indigenous, immigrant communities of color. We need to make more investments in our disadvantaged communities, in our marginalized communities, so that they can rise up and have more access to economic opportunities, access to quality education, and also access to living in safe communities with affordable homes and accessible homes. But in order for us to do that, we do have to implement policies, whether we call it reparations, whether we call it an investment program, whether we look at working with our federal government to ensure that people who just can't make enough. I mean, $15 minimum wage, it's not enough. It's not enough. I remember making $15 minimum wage. I was in my 20s and I still couldn't pay my bills. So we have to do more. So I do support programs that support our communities so that we can create more economic opportunities for all people in Providence so that Providence can be affordable for all.
Mr. Cuervo.
The Universal Basic Income program that the city led was a study. It was a pilot. And I think it's an interesting concept. That conversation is happening all over the world, particularly in Europe. I think that the city shouldn't be in the business of extending that currently because the economic realities of Providence and Rhode Island don't sustain something like that. But it's a good conversation to be had. In terms of the reparations program, I think that this process that Mayor Lorza began, that his administration began working closely with leaders in the African American community, has raised very important conversations and has allowed people who felt unseen for years, for decades, people who were displaced from neighborhoods like College Hill and other neighborhoods to feel like they finally have a voice. I think we need to continue that. And I think what we have seen is that this administration has had a bit of a communications challenge, a messaging challenge, a branding challenge. And they're very good at getting good concepts and good ideas and having people think that they're terrible things. And we can turn that around. We have the expertise to turn that around. As mayor, I look forward to turning that around.
Mr. Smiley, I can't believe I didn't get to this until now. I want to talk about housing. The housing market is simply not meeting demand. Data shows that we have historic lows in rental vacancy rates as well as housing production. So what's your position on fixing the housing crisis in Providence, and what will your first course of action be as mayor?
So both home ownership and rental affordability is a major crisis in our city, and we need to build more. It starts with increasing the supply of housing at every level, at every price point in every neighborhood. So we need to make it easier to do business in Providence. We need to make it easier to build in Providence. You know, the first step of that, I know this is of particular importance to the folks, the Drury District Association, who've been very frustrated by this in the past, is to allow the impacted local communities to both be aware of and have the chance to have their voices heard early in the process, which is both good for the neighborhoods, but it's also good for the developer. You know, having these projects get all the way down the track, and then the neighbors feel like they've been left out, the developer feels like they thought they were already past this stage of the process, and the train goes off the tracks. And so I'm committed to making it easier to build and develop in Providence with neighborhood input at the outset, and then a predictable process thereon. I will say that I think there is a fabulous opportunity. It was in the paper today. It's something I've been talking about for a while, and it might be my first act as mayor, around the notion of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, also known as granny flats or in-laws, where we can make it easier for homeowners and property owners in Providence to develop additional single units on their property, so that we can be adding one-off units that can make a meaningful impact. Both it can provide rental income to help families in Providence stay in their home, keep up with the rising costs of home ownership. It can add units. We know that owner-occupied landlords are good landlords, and it gives us an opportunity to also take what we know is a widespread problem of illegal units and substandard and unsafe units in the city to get brought into the fold, be made safe, be made productive, and have more units spread throughout the city in a productive way. And so the legislation that's proposed at the State House is enabling. It's going to require some local action, and I look forward to taking that action.
Can't wait to rent my garage to college students at PC.
As should be your right or choice.
Ms. LaFortune, housing's super complicated, but what's your first action as mayor to kind of try to make a dent in this problem?
So, some of the things that I've already done is I'm a co-sponsor of the housing bond, where we allocate a certain percentage of our tax revenue into housing. Also, I introduced legislation to incentivize developers to develop more housing in the city, affordable housing in the city of Providence, and would be based on AMI. We have a significant housing crisis. Over 70% of our residents are cost burdened, which means over 30% of their income goes into housing. It's problematic. Most people cannot afford to live here across various socioeconomic brackets. So supply and demand, right? It's economics. We need more housing to drive down the cost, but we also need to have a better comprehensive housing plan so that we're building housing in every community. West Elmwood Housing has a wonderful model around inclusionary zoning. I introduced an idea in 2019 to looking at the North Main Street corridor, because that's an opportunity for mixed-use development, and we've been working on that. So we can have housing throughout the city of Providence. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We can implement some of these models that currently exist, but also creating pathways for people to purchase and own their own homes. And One Neighborhood Building is doing some work around that. And again, we just need to bring those people to the table who are doing the work and create a plan for the city of Providence. We don't have to recreate the wheel.
Mr. Cuervo, fix the housing problem in 90 seconds.
Easy. So one of the challenges that we have is we have a very low level of owner occupancy and home ownership in the city of Providence. 50% of our population are renters, and nearly half of those are cost burden. They're paying almost half of their monthly income into the rent. We need to increase the level of home ownership and the level of owner occupancy. But one of the first things I would do is leverage the mayor's soft power, particularly during that initial honeymoon period, to go up to the State House and really lobby our legislature to change the way the state calculates AMI for affordability. Every year, we have left hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding for affordable housing because we run our calculus for affordability of housing at a higher AMI than what the federal government allows. And we could be leveraging those federal funds to build in Providence, to rehab old housing stock, build new stock, use tons of irregular and undersized lots that the city holds under control to build housing.
Mr. Solomon, on the housing crisis in Providence, what's your first action as mayor to solve it?
Build more housing. No, actually, at one point, I was the president of Neighborhood Ones, which is a nonprofit organization that builds affordable housing. And at the time, I wasn't an elected official, but we worked hard. We took a dump area, I remember, down in Olneyville, and we transformed it into a neighborhood. And as council president, I was fortunate enough to work with West Elmwood and the Omni Group to secure $35 million in federal money to build affordable housing in the city. So we can work, as long as we're working with some of the nonprofits, they do real good work. And I know in Olneyville right now, they're building Paragon Mills, which is being done. It's just a matter of putting up these units, but at some point, there's going to be a bubble burst along the way. It's coming because, you know, we keep putting them up. It's nice as long as we got people to fill them. There's going to be a point where we're not going to have any people to fill these apartments. And I worry that we may get into a point where we may have all these apartments and nobody to fill them. So that's a concern that I have too.
Candidates, take a deep breath. It's kind of over. I want to congratulate all of you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing your vision for the city of Providence. This went only slightly longer than the Senate District 3 debate that I moderated a few months ago. We're going to get to closing statements in a second, but I want to thank everybody who's watching, everybody who's in the room. This is a really important election. And sometimes it's going to fly under the radar because you have a governor's race and you have a race for Congress that we haven't seen in a long time. The race for mayor of Providence, I would argue, is as important as any race in this state. I'm a resident, so I care about it deeply. I know everybody in this room feels the same way. Quick plug, please subscribe to my daily newsletter, Roadmap. It's completely free. Then we will hit you up for paid subscriptions later on, I promise. And, you know, most importantly, I know a lot of people in this room have probably already made their decision on who they're supporting, but I really urge you to pay attention to the extensive coverage that we're seeing in this city. I see Pat Ford is filming this here tonight. The Providence Journal has done some really great reporting. My former colleague, Steph Machado at Channel 12 is doing really good stuff covering the city. Steve Alquist at Uprise, I think, has done an interview with every candidate here. So go out and educate yourselves. Thank you so much for being here. And Ms. LaFortune, I'm going to give you 60 seconds as a closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you to the Jewelry District for hosting this event. Thank you, Sharon Steele, for all the work that you did in coordinating this. The time is now. We need a leader who is going to prioritize the city of Providence. We know that the city faces real challenges, but it's also an amazing city to live in. I chose to move my family back home to Providence. I chose to put my kids in the public schools because regardless of what we say of the public schools, I am a product. I went from Mount Pleasant High School to Brown University. And now I'm back reinvesting in my community, the community that served me. That's the leader we need, who has the experience, who is going to get the work done. Really quickly, one of the things I like to do is run through every single neighborhood in the city of Providence. There's so much potential, but we need a mayor who is, again, going to prioritize education, public safety, who's going to ensure that government works for all people. That means creating affordable, accessible housing. That means cleaning up our streets and fixing our sidewalks. That means making sure that we have honest and open government. And I am confident that I'm that person. And so I urge all of you to go to votenirva.com, read my platform, reach out to me, send an email. I'm happy to meet for coffee. I love coffee, and Providence has some of the best coffee spots in the state. But we can't settle for the status quo. Like Dan said, this is an important race. And we can't settle for anything less than someone who's going to move our city to the future that it deserves to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaFortune. I'll let you guys clap for her. Mr. Cuervo, your closing statement.
I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank Dan for a fantastic job. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to be here and to listen and to participate in this fantastic civic process. I'm running for mayor because, like my fellow candidates, I love this city. This city has given me everything. I was born here. I had the opportunity to open a small business here. I raised my kids here. And I've led a lifetime of civic engagement in many neighborhoods and across the city, in this city. I know what we're capable of in Providence. You know what we're capable of. And this is a highly siloed city. There are many different communities that coexist here. And many times we can be here for years and not really interact with those other communities. But we all share a love for the city. We all share a knowledge of its potential. And we all agree that Providence can be a world-class city that provides opportunities not only for fabulous arts and culture, not only for unbelievable economic development, not only to be an attraction that people fall in love with when they come here, but also to lift thousands of families out of poverty, to create homeownership opportunities for so many families, and to create a path to the middle class for many of our neighborhoods. That's why I'm running, because my entire trajectory throughout life, throughout my career as a parent, as a small business person, as a community advocate, I have spent that trajectory bringing people together to create solutions that are practical solutions, both in government, in community, in business. And I want to bring this to the mayor's office so that we can realize Providence's full potential. So I invite you all to check out gonzaloforprovidence.com and get in touch with me, and I look forward to seeing you on the trail.
Mr. Solomon, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to come and listen to the candidates tonight. My background and passion for Providence has prepared me for this moment. I am humbly asking you to consider me as your future mayor because I feel I am the best person to bring this city together and to get it working more efficiently and effectively for the residents. I was a city council president from 2010 to 2014, and I understand what it takes to be mayor and solve some of the major challenges we face. I want to help Providence chart a new course for our future. I want you to help me be part of my campaign by voting for me and taking part for the betterment of our city. I think moving forward that there's going to be a lot of exciting things happening in the city of Providence. And I know it's a matter of working efficiently and working together with people and bringing all the stakeholders together. And I think my past, I have shown that I could work with people, I could work with different organizations to get things done. I've done it before and I can do it again. And I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Solomon. And Mr. Smiley, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Dan, Sharon, everyone from the Neighborhood Association, and everyone else who came out tonight. A couple of the things we talked about tonight, there are some really big challenges coming our way in the city. As we discussed, the pilot agreements with the colleges and the hospitals were 20-year agreements negotiated under Mayor Cicilline, expired this summer. 10 years ago, Mayor Taveras negotiated the suspension of certain pension costs, which expire next year. And last year, the city received over $100 million in federal funding. It's making it look like we don't have any financial problems at all. But that money will soon be gone. In the years to come, we need a leader who is ready to lead and who is not learning on the job to make sure that these three factors don't create a crisis, but instead create an opportunity. I was proud to be the city's first chief operating officer, the governor's chief of staff, and the state director of administration. I'm the only candidate who's ever managed people or budgets of this size, the only candidate who's ever negotiated a labor contract, the only candidate who's already managed city operations. This is a job about running a better city, and I know that we can meet these challenges together, and I know that we can make this the best run city in the country, and I ask for your vote in the Democratic primary on September 13th. Thank you.
Before I let everyone go, I have one last trick question for you, and it's not a trick. Sharon and I were talking I probably have 100 more questions to ask, but I don't want to bore everybody. Will all of you commit to doing one more of these forums in addition to whatever else you're doing before the September 13th primary?
Sure.
Thank you. Everyone, round of applause for the Democratic candidates for Mayor of Providence. Thank you so much, everyone.